So welcome to everybody, and my thanks first of all to the Animal Interfaith Alliance for facilitating this webinar, and especially to Barbara Gardner for all her organizational efforts. So what we're going to have a look at this afternoon is a timeline and milestones in the anti-vivisection movement since 1980. Now, a lot has happened, and actually a lot hasn't happened, as we will see. So animal research currently, to most people, is regarded as a necessary evil. Animal experimentation takes place in the pharmaceutical industry, in the chemical industry, in the development and testing of new drugs, also in basic research. Basic research, in layman's terms, is scientific curiosity that may or may not produce a result. And then we have also, of course, vaccine development and testing, which has certainly been brought to the fore with the COVID epidemic. So that's really where we are at a moment. And the debate, as portrayed by the mainstream media, is serious scientists and serious life-saving scientific research versus animal rights activists, people generally with little or no scientific background, who for animal welfare reasons are opposed to animal experimentation. A very unbalanced debate. I think the first milestone that we should note is the full-page advert in the New York Times in 1980. Now, a Belgian animal rights activist by the name of Henry Spira moved to the United States, and I don't know how, but he managed to raise enough money to pay for a full-page ad in the New York Times with a heading, "How many rabbits does Revlon blind for beauty's sake?" And this genius campaign caught the pharmaceutical industry completely by surprise, and they immediately put their hand in their pocket and came up with quite a nice sum of money at the time. Revlon, I believe, came up with $750,000, which in 1980 was a lot of money. And Revlon was joined by other cosmetic companies who also didn't want to be associated with animal cruelty and felt obviously that they had been exposed. And so the cosmetic industry jointly helped to create in 1981, so that was pretty quick, the Center for Alternatives to Animal Testing, based at the Johns Hopkins Medical Center in Baltimore. The center exists today, and so bear in mind that was 1981, and what the animal rights community was calling for was a replacement of animal testing for cosmetics. Now, fast forward to 2003, so that's already 22 years later, the 7th Amendment of the Cosmetics Directive, which prohibits animal testing within the European Union for cosmetic products since 2004 and cosmetic ingredients since March 2009. But actually this directive, or the amendment, didn't really come into full effect until 2013, because it was only as of 2013 that cosmetic companies were not supposed to test finished products, ingredients, and were not supposed to import cosmetics tested on animals outside of the EU. So that came into force, let's say, completely in 2013. So that is 32 years after the Center for Alternatives was established. So that is a long time. Now, one must bear in mind that for cosmetics to obtain marketing authorization, it's fairly similar actually to pharmaceutical products. There are about 11 required toxicity tests for cosmetics to obtain marketing authorization. And really what the cosmetics industry focused on was those tests that really applied only to cosmetics. So by definition, a cosmetic is a product that you apply externally. So to your skin, to your lips, to your eyelids, etc., externally to the skin, not something that you would ingest normally, although obviously cosmetic creams are absorbed through the skin. And that is why, even for cosmetics, it's required, there are 11 required toxicity tests. So, as we said, 4 non-animal methods were developed by the cosmetics industry. It took them a long time, a very long time, but they are available today. They are based on human cell culture, so totally devoid of animal tests. And as was said before, it applies to the skin. So skin sensitization, allergies, in other words, skin allergies, skin irritation, skin absorption, skin corrosion. And so the cosmetics industry has managed to come up with the goods, but for only 4 out of the 11 required tests. So you will ask, well, what about the other 7 required toxicity tests? Well, the cosmetics industry has been naughty, if you want to put it mildly, because they are very well aware that the majority of ingredients in cosmetics are actually industrial chemicals. They originate in the industrial, in the chemical industry, and therefore the cosmetics industry can use a different regulation, a different directive, which is called the REACH regulation, which stands for Registration, Evaluation, Authorization, and Restriction of Chemicals. So for any substance that has a dual purpose, in other words, chemical industry and cosmetics industry, the cosmetics industry very cleverly can test products for the other required toxicity tests, for the outstanding 7 toxicity tests via the REACH regulation. And that gets around the cosmetics directive. So the cosmetics industry hasn't been completely honest with consumers, because for most consumers, there is no more animal testing for cosmetics products. Well, unfortunately, it's only true for 4 out of the 11. And so for the other 7 out of the 11, animal testing still occurs. Well, simply there hasn't been enough consumer pressure on the cosmetics industry to change its habits. Now, an important milestone took place in 2011, and that was the replacement of mice to test Botox. Now, Botox, as most people know, is used cosmetically to remove wrinkles, facial wrinkles. And so the Humane Society of the United States launched a campaign to persuade the manufacturer of Botox in the United States to come up with an alternative to the use of mice as living test tubes for quality control and testing of Botox products in the cosmetics market. And this campaign of the Humane Society of the United States was so successful that it persuaded the manufacturer in the United States called Allergan to develop a completely non-animal test method to replace the use of millions of mice, because mice were used in the millions to test every batch of Botox before it could be sent to cosmetic clinics. And so this is a very important milestone because Botox is no ordinary substance. Botox is the most potent toxin known to science. It's botulinum toxin. It's produced by Clostridium botulinum, a bacterium, and a tiny amount is enough to kill a person. And just to give you an idea of its lethality and why mice were used, is that a tiny vial of Botox that you will find in a cosmetics clinic, which contains about 1.5 milliliters of liquid. Not all Botox, of course. I mean, not all botulinum toxin. Obviously, there's probably some sterile water there as well. But that tiny vial of 1.5 milliliters, which will be used in the injection to get rid of people's facial wrinkles, will kill 500 mice. So that's how potent Botox is, and that's how sensitive mice are. And that is why the cosmetics industry used mice as a living test tube, because mice are so sensitive. And it was thought for many years by the industry and by their scientists that it would be virtually impossible to replace the use of mice because they were such a sensitive indicator for quality control. And yet this campaign by the HSUS, which mobilized public opinion, managed to persuade the manufacturer that if they didn't replace the mouse, then they might see their shares begin to drop. And that really is the incentive, I believe, that was needed to persuade the manufacturer to invest in this non-animal method, non-animal test method, which virtually eliminates the use of mice. And actually, many people do not know about this example, but it's a very powerful example. So what is the take-home message? Well, the consumer pressure and public opinion are the best strategy to replace animal tests in the cosmetics industry. The cosmetics industry has dragged its feet, so about 30 years to replace skin tests, 4 tests out of the required 11. The cosmetics industry has cheated on the 7th Amendment by testing its products under the REACH regulation. So 7 out of the 11 required toxicity tests can be carried out under REACH, since most of the substances contained in cosmetics products are industrial chemicals. And so as a result of the cosmetics directive, only around 5,000 animal lives are spared per year in the European Union out of a total of 10 or more million animals used every year. So that's to put things into perspective. So now what about the pharmaceutical industry? Well, obviously, consumer pressure is far less effective in replacing animal tests in the pharmaceutical industry, since consumers cannot choose between animal tested and cruelty-free products. So by law, all pharmaceutical products have to be tested generally on at least 2 species, usually the rat and a dog or a monkey, in order to obtain marketing approval, or before going into clinical trials in humans at any rate. So obviously a different strategy must be used. For example, a legal challenge. So here I would like to give a concrete example, and that is the replacement of animals used for the production of antibodies used in biomedical research. So if we take a look for a moment at the replacement of animals for antibody production, this is quite significant in terms of animal use, because 1 million animals are used in the EU every year, and I include the UK in this, by the way. 1 million animals are used in the EU every year for the production of antibodies, which represents 10% of the total number of animals used every year. 10% of 10 million is 1 million. That is a lot of animals. So this is really something where we could really reduce animal use significantly. And the European Centre for the Validation of Alternative Methods, which is the reference laboratory of the European Commission. Okay, so the Center for the Validation of Alternative Methods has published a recommendation based on the opinion of its Scientific Advisory Committee, which states that animals should no longer be used for the development and production of antibodies for research, regulatory, diagnostic, and therapeutic applications. And there you have the link below. By the way, that this webinar is being recorded, so anybody who's missed it can catch up later. So what is the legal basis for courtroom challenge? Well, the directive concerning animal experiments, which is Directive 2010/63/EU on the protection of animals used for scientific purposes. Article 4, Principle of Replacement, Reduction and Refinement, clearly states that member states shall ensure that wherever possible, a scientifically satisfactory method or testing strategy not entailing the use of live animals shall be used instead of a procedure. Procedure meaning an animal experiment. Now, this still applies to the UK, whether or not the UK is part of the EU or not. You have this in your 1986 Animal Scientific Procedures Act. So it certainly applies to the UK. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so where does the burden of proof lie? Well, I must take my hat off to the Italian judges, because according to a recent Italian court ruling, the burden of proof lies with the animal researcher to demonstrate that no suitable alternative exists. So according to the interpretation of the directive, in Italy at least, by Italian judges, it's not, the onus is not on animal welfare organizations to prove that an alternative exists. The burden of proof is on the animal researchers to demonstrate that no suitable alternative exists. That is very interesting. I don't know whether UK judges have the same interpretation, but this is something very, very useful. Of course, it's problematic trying to compare the efficacy of animal tests with non-animal test methods because animal tests are very poor predictors of human outcome. And the best example we have of that is the next slide. But basically, non-animal tests, which use human material, human cells, human cell culture, organ on a chip, etc., require a prediction rate in the region of 85 to 90% to be accepted by the regulatory authorities. Now, it's bizarre, it's ridiculous that next to this we have animal tests whose prediction power is well below that of tossing a coin, and that is still the default option. In other words, as far as the regulatory agencies are concerned, animal tests have to be submitted in order for a drug company to get their drug into clinical trials in humans. Obviously, if a drug company wants to submit human data, that's fine, but the animal data almost comes first. At this point, I think we all agree that the predictive power of animal testing is poor. The best example, of course, is the Food and Drug Administration, which states that 9 out of 10 drugs that pass animal tests will fail during clinical trials. So that's why that's how I got the 10% prediction rate. So I think we can agree that it's time to move forward to challenge the science of animal testing. And I see no better opportunity than EDM 250. And now, while I get myself some more water. So really, this would be the first time that we ask the government to have a serious scientific debate about whether animal experiments actually work or not. We're not asking the government to decide whether animals suffered during animal experimentation. That is a no-brainer. It's time to have a serious scientific debate as to whether animal experiments actually work. And then in conclusion, I will let you read this wonderful quote from Joseph Pulitzer. So really the bottom line is publicity may not be the only thing that is needed, but it is one thing without which all other agencies will fail. So thank you so much for your participation. What I'm going to do now is see if there are any questions that I can reply to. So if you have any questions in the Q&A, please go ahead. This is your moment. This is your opportunity. Unless, of course, I was so clear that nobody has any questions, but I doubt that's the case. Obviously, it's easier if we could talk, but a webinar limits the interaction. I will hang on another minute to see whether anybody has any questions in the Q&A. There we go. So has the COVID pandemic put us back in our desire to reduce animal testing? Well, the COVID pandemic is very, very interesting because it took the scientific community by surprise. And so most of the initial data was actually human data, patient data. And most of the clinical trials involved testing known drugs, but perhaps in a new application on patients without going through animal testing. Unfortunately, the animal researchers, once they got on their feet again, once they recovered from the shock, they started developing their animal models, which of course hasn't helped because there's just so much human data. We're way past the animal testing data stage. Besides the fact that animals respond differently to humans, of course. So yes, the COVID pandemic certainly has illustrated the fact that biomedical research can get by very nicely without animal experimentation. The problem is that I don't know well, the industry certainly, is still in its old bad habits of animal testing. So that's why we really need something like a political initiative, a parliamentary sponsored scientific debate to challenge the value of animal experimentation. As far as I'm concerned, the animal researchers have lost on the science. The scientific evidence is so overwhelming in terms of the reliability of non-animal test methods compared to animal testing. We've won there. We've won on the science. Where the challenge lies today is in communication. And unfortunately, fraudulent science. The COVID pandemic, I think, has illustrated this perfectly, because most scientists, most independent scientists and researchers have not yet seen the evidence of the clinical trials of the vaccine, of the COVID vaccines, the new COVID vaccines. And yet the manufacturers, the vaccine manufacturers, have managed to get authorizing or marketing authorization from the regulatory agencies virtually on the strength of press announcements, of press communiques. I mean, that is unprecedented. And it's all over the media in France. I don't know about the UK, but It's all over the media in France. Professors and researchers are saying this has never happened before in the history of science. Today, I saw, I think on the BBC, that President Trump told the director of the FDA if he didn't approve Pfizer's vaccine, he could find himself another job. I mean, this is unbelievable. It's unprecedented. And this is in addition to Lancet Gate and all the other scandals that we've seen. So really, we need the pharmaceutical industry has to be brought to heel. They cannot continue to use animals and to apply enormous pressure on the regulatory authorities, on politicians, and so on. But that really is a sub discussion. I'm going to go on to the next question. Can you explain again how only 5,000 out of 10 million animals are spared in cosmetics testing? Yes. Basically, the 10 million animals used every year in the EU, just to simplify things, the majority of those 10 million animals are either used in fundamental research, in other words, what researchers do at universities, which is scientific curiosity. That's about half of that number. And about 25% of that number is regulatory toxicology. In other words, animal testing for marketing approval of new chemicals and new drugs, which is the 11 toxicity tests. Not only, but it's largely revolves around the 11 toxicity tests. And so if we cut down, so if we take away basic research, if we take away applied research, and we look at only regulatory toxicology, out of the 11 required toxicity tests, as I mentioned, only 4 replace animals, so the skin tests. And so that's where the 5,000 animals are spared. That 5,000 animals corresponds to the 4 skin tests that have been replaced by non-animal test methods. So I'm going to move on to the next question. I hope that was clear. So how do we get this political debate? Well, contact your MP. Ask them to support EDM 250. That's where you come in. What is your opinion on vaccine development using animals, and how many vegans will choose not to have it because of it? Well, I can't answer the second part of the question because I'm not a prophet. But yes, that's a good question, because the second part of the question, some vegans, well, not every vaccine is the same. For example, the AstraZeneca vaccine developed in the UK contains, believe it or not, a chimpanzee genetically modified virus. Okay, a chimpanzee genetically modified virus. So on those grounds, a vegan could refuse the AstraZeneca, the Oxford University vaccine. Whereas I believe that, I'm not 100% sure, but I think the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, for example, they do not contain animal viruses. However, they are based on a completely new technology, which has never been tested on humans before. And amazingly, the vaccine industry has managed to telescope what normally takes 15 years into about 1 year. So first of all, there's no way that we can know what the medium and the long-term side effects are. And secondly, don't forget that all these vaccines were tested on healthy volunteers. So we don't know what the side effects are on people who have comorbidities, in other words, who already have pre-existing health problems, very old people, etc., etc. The animal testing, yes, animals were used in the development, or rather the marketing approval for the vaccine, for the more for legal reasons than scientific reasons. In other words, to fulfill a requirement in law which dates back to the end of the Second World War. In other words, 1946, 1947, the Nuremberg trials. There was a doctor's trial at Nuremberg, in addition to the trial against crimes against humanity. And at that trial in 1946, it was decided, because of what the Nazis did to the concentration camp victims, the human experiments, it was decided then to create a framework for human experimentation, which is called clinical trials. Because, I mean, clinical trials sounds much better than human experimentation, but that's what it is. It's human experimentation. So as a result now, drug manufacturers are required to test normally on a rodent and a non-rodent species. So the rodent is usually the rat, the non-rodent species is usually a dog. If it's vaccines, it's usually a monkey, before proceeding to clinical trials. So again, that is done for legal reasons, not for scientific reasons. I go on to the next question by Chris. The UK government have made a lot of the fact, in their opinion, the UK leaving the EU allows for potential positive changes for animal welfare, and the example they regularly use is a ban on live exports, but I cannot recall much publicity regarding proposed animal experimentation law changes in the UK. I think really it's up to the UK public. I mean, the UK public, once informed, for example, of EDM 250, can do a lot to mobilize their MPs, to ask their MPs to support EDM 250. I mean, this is just one strategy, but I think it's a very important strategy, because at the end of the day, animal experimentation has never been challenged on a scientific level. Animal experimentation has always been presented or perceived as scientists versus animal rights activists. And that is a very unlevel playing field. And today there is a sufficient population of scientists and medical experts who are ready and willing to testify that animal experimentation is bad science, it's counterproductive, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for public health, etc., etc. So I think we're there. The time is ripe. The time is ripe for a legal challenge on the science behind animal experimentation. And so I think all roads lead to the UK Parliament. I'm working with other parliaments in the EU, and each member state, each country has its own strengths and its own weaknesses. I gave you the example of Italy, where the judges there are outstanding. I mean, their interpretation of the directive on animal experimentation opens the way to perhaps stopping some non-human primate experiments in Italy. And once we have a precedent, then we can apply that to other EU member states and eventually the UK, of course. So really, I think it's up to the UK citizens to take the initiative to contact their MPs and say and ask them, have you supported EDM 250? Oh, you haven't heard of EDM 250? Well, let me tell you what EDM 250 is all about. And then you can introduce it to them. The next question I have is Brexit looking to be a step backward or an optimistic prospect in regard to animal experimentation? Well, I think I've already answered that. It's really it's not up to Brexit, it's up to UK citizens. It's really entirely up to UK citizens. I, of course, am very, very happy to provide any of you as individuals, any organizations in the UK with scientific backing, if and when it's needed. And there are some very, very far bigger names than mine, far bigger names than mine in science, also willing to step forward and be representatives or even be witnesses in any legal challenge or any parliamentary debate, judged not by MPs, but rather by scientific experts in the respective fields of science. The next question is, back in the 70s, I had to handle LD50 data from toxicity tests of chemicals. Do those tests continue now? The LD50, unfortunately, in some cases does continue. It has been replaced to some extent. Replaced is actually not the right word. It's reduced, because there are several OECD test guidelines. There are 3 OECD guidelines which recommend statistical methods in order to use far fewer animals. The classic LD50 used between 80 and 200 animals, whereas the OECD test guidelines, the new OECD OECD test guidelines use, between 5 and perhaps 10 animals, which is still too many. But in addition to that, there has been an initiative to replace acute toxicity testing. In other words, to reduce, to completely eliminate the LD50, but unfortunately not by non-animal tests, but rather by chronic toxicity testing. So in other words, instead of the regulator asking the manufacturer, the drug manufacturer, to provide data on LD50 data concerning, for example, rats, among the 11 required toxicity tests, if you remember, there were 11 required toxicity tests. Well, 2 of those required toxicity tests, the one is acute toxicity, which is the LD50, and the second is chronic toxicity or repeat dose toxicity. The difference between the two is that acute toxicity normally takes place over a very short period of time. It could be hours to a few days. In other words, how long does it take before the animal dies when you give it a really big dose? Okay, the lethal LD50 is the lethal dose, which kills 50% of the test animals. So they get a big dose of the product to see how much of it actually kills the animal. So the regulators are, I think, reasonably ready to forego the LD50 data within the context of regulatory toxicology. But they still want toxicity data regarding the possible poisoning effects of the substance. And so what they then say is that, okay, we'll drop the requirement for the acute toxicity, but we want you to do the repeat dose toxicity. And that means that the animals receive a smaller dose of the substance over a longer period of time. So for example, in dogs, you will have the 90-day, the 90-day chronic toxicity experiment or repeat dose experiment. At the end of the 90 days, the dog is then killed and the organs examined, etc., and the data from that can then be used to satisfy the regulatory requirements for LD50. I mean, it's actually absolutely meaningless in terms of public health. As a veterinarian, I can tell you that a beagle liver is completely different to a human liver, and it's really the liver that is crucial in terms of detoxification. And that probably explains why about 50% of toxic effects not seen in animals occur in people, and it is liver toxicity. So the animals really are very, very poor at picking up liver toxicity. So again, that is another reason to request, or I would even say demand, a scientific debate from our parliament. So the scientists who are ready and available, there are some EU, there are some in the UK, but the scientists that I'm thinking of are probably mostly based in the US. And today I do not see that as an impediment. Thanks to the Visio conferences and video conferences, really there is no problem in the UK Parliament wanting to interview a US scientist, via video conferencing. I don't see that as a problem at all. And then another question, any good examples from countries outside the EU and the UK, any positive judgments like the Italy one, or other positive examples from other countries? There are small examples, yes, but we really, prove that the animal model or animal experimentation is not only cruel, it represents very bad science. So I think we can move on. It's time to move on to something more more demanding, like EDM 250. I mean, animal experimentation has gone on for far too long, and we can see from the example of the cosmetics industry, when they are left to their own devices, they will do the absolute minimum. They only replaced 4 out of the 11 toxicity tests. Now, can you imagine if in 1981 the cosmetics industry had fulfilled its corporate social responsibility to consumers and said, you know what, we're going to go the extra mile. We're going to find alternatives to all 11 toxicity tests. And yes, it's a tall order. We can't do it on our own. So what we'll do is we'll get in touch with the pharmaceutical industry, because if we put our heads together and our resources, financial resources together, I think we can come up with the goods. And I think we already know the answer to that, because the amount of money that has been invested in the COVID epidemic, I mean, we're talking billions and billions and billions. And unfortunately, a lot of this money has been wasted on drugs that don't work. And I think we're going to see other bad surprises as time goes on. But the point is that if industry wants to, it can make things happen very, very fast. So I think it's all about political will here. It's all about political will. It's about getting public opinion mobilized and telling MPs it's time to have a serious scientific debate on the value of animal experimentation, judged by scientific experts, not judged by MPs. Unfortunately, most MPs do not have a scientific background. They don't have the competence, the ability to judge what is being given to them. And unfortunately, the track record is very poor, because when we see the influence of the pharmaceutical industry on the political system, the example of President Trump telling the director of the FDA, if you don't approve Pfizer's vaccine, you can get out, you've lost your job. That's where we are today. That's very, very sad. That's very anti-democratic. It's very worrying. So I think it's time, so we've seen that it's all about political will. The pharmaceutical industry has the resources, the technology is available, it's been available for a few years now, and it's just about getting rid of a 70-year-old law that requires animal testing, even though it's completely it's 70 years behind the science. So that's really where we are. I think it's a no-brainer. So another question: where is China on this issue? Well, China, unfortunately, does its own thing. In other words, they continue to do animal testing for cosmetics. Only if enough pressure is brought to bear on China, and China wants to export its cosmetics to the EU, will they then cut down or stop or replace animal testing for cosmetics. But I think that China, like any other country in the world, they will follow the trend. So in other words, if tomorrow the EU and the UK and the United States start to replace animal testing, China will follow suit. They will have to follow suit, because if they want to get their products onto the international market, then that's what they have to do. And the non-animal tests today are far more predictive. I mean, they are predictive in the region of 85 to 90%, compared to animal testing, which is in the region of 10 to 50%. So, on those grounds alone, the regulatory authority, the international regulatory authorities will tell China, we can't accept your animal data anymore, because everybody's using this new technology, this evidence-based technology, I should say, evidence-based technology. Of course, this webinar is going to be publicly available. Once I've uploaded it, the website will be posted on the AIA website, and anybody and everybody, of course, is free to distribute as you see fit. Okay, well, I think, let me see if there are no more questions. Okay, right. Well, I'm just getting thank you messages. So, okay, so I'm going to remind those of you who are members of AIA that we have our annual general meeting in about a quarter of an hour, and it's a different link to this one. So see you then. So thank you all very, very much, and have a great afternoon. Bye for now.